Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of Stand Up for Grain Safety. I am Barb Grove, and I am your moderator today. I am the Quality Systems Manager from Central Valley Ag, Jeeps and MGFA member, and I am a founder of the National Stand Up for Grain Safety event. We've got a great lineup here today. Can't wait for you all to just get a part and get involved. And so, what to expect from today? We do want involvement from you. So, watch the chat, check out what's going on out there. We'll pop up a poll, we'll throw out a quiz at the end. But at any time during the session, if you have a question for our speaker, make sure to go ahead and pop that in the chat. I'll be watching for that. And at the end, I will make sure that our speaker gets your questions and can answer anything that you might want clarified, or, hey, you want to know how can this speaker help you out a little bit from a question that you have from your site. And then we will, near the end, as time allows, we'll be watching that. We will go ahead and allow everybody to come on camera and unmute yourself if you have a few direct questions that you really feel that you want to ask of the speaker, and it may be harder to put them in the chat. If you have any technical issues today, first, check your own settings. We all know every company has their own security type settings. As we move around and are remote and in office, sometimes our own settings change. But if you really are struggling to get in or hear things, go ahead and email grainsafety2010@gmail.com, and we'll throw that out there in the chat so you have it, and somebody's monitoring that email so they can help check it out here for you a little bit. We want to make sure everybody has a great experience. Our learning sessions today are brought to you um, uh, from the Grain Elevator and Processing Society Jeeps, from the Grain Handling Safety Kennel, GHSC. Thank you to Kat there at GHSC for everything you do this week and all the hard work you do to put together all of these trainings. We also have generous support from a lot of sponsors to make sure that we can continue to find resources for people and to keep these sessions free, give free learning sessions so everybody has access. And if you want to look at registration or check out the schedule, go to standupforgrainsafety.org. Remember, we may be on day 4, but we're not done yet. So this afternoon at 2 p.m. Central Time, we will have a Spanish language session on this same topic. And then tomorrow we have at 10 a.m. Central Time, heat stress and temperature extremes. And then note the afternoon session time for tomorrow has changed to 12 noon Central Time. Hey, because who wants to sit and do learning in classes on Friday afternoon? So we move that up a little bit so that everybody can start winding down from work for the weekend. So again, check that schedule out at standupforgrainsafety.org. You know, as this week is dedicated to safety, we want to remind everybody of our rights and our responsibilities. Employers are required to provide a safe and healthy workplace free of known hazards, even if you are not subject to OSHA enforcement. And as an employee, you have the right to have a safe and healthy workplace free of hazards, and to be able to report concerns without fear of retaliation. So these learning sessions, again, would not be possible without generous support of our sponsors and our partners. And I'm going to list those off for you because, hey, you see somebody, make sure to give them a little pat on the back there and tell them a thank you. But Bartlett Grain Company, Central States Center for Agriculture Safety and Health, Central Valley Ag, the Grain Elevator and Processing Society, GEEPS, Grain and Feed Association of Illinois, Grain Journal, Kansas State University, Lamar Advertising Company, National Grain and Feed Foundation and National Grain and Feed Association, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, University of Nebraska Medical Center, and of course, Grain Handling Safety Council. So let's show our appreciation. Get involved today. I see that chat moving already, but let's give a little applause to all those people who make these events possible. So a link is going to be posted later on in the presentation today for a certificate of attendance after the event. So you can recognize your participation and receive a stand-up certificate by registering at standupforgrainsafety.org. Just so everybody knows, because we get this question all the time, this session is being recorded and it will be available, definitely within the next week or so on Stand Up for Grain Safety website, plus also used YouTube. So look for the Stand Up for Grain Safety YouTube channel, and we will be posting those out there here as soon as we can get them up after our event. We want to make sure to encourage everybody to participate in the polls, the chat box, and the Q&A, because we want to hear from you. During this session, put comments and questions in chat box and be sure to participate. At the end of today's session, when you end Zoom, there will be a short survey that will pop up in your browser. We encourage you to complete this, share your thoughts, your suggestions, any ideas for future stand-up topics. So let's start our participation. I can see people have been doing that already, so thank you. But tell everybody where you're viewing from. During the session, we have supportive people in the background to help clarify any regulatory questions. Just again, as a reminder to everybody, we do hail from different states all across the nation. We do hail from different countries. So regulation is different depending on where you are. Are you a state plan? Are you a national plan? So we want to make sure that if there's anything that points to regulatory, we want to make sure we don't have any misinformation out there or misunderstanding. So we do have somebody monitoring that will help clarify that. But any Q&A you have for the speaker, we will wait till the end. And that way we can get that, hey, right from today's expert. We want to make sure that everybody is counted today. Sometimes the education we do is funded by a grant, but also in general, we just like to make sure that we know how many people are on. So our first poll that we're going to have today is, tell us how many people are viewing with you. While that poll is up, it'll stay up here for just a few minutes. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's session. So today's sponsor for this session is Central States Center for Agriculture Safety and Health. And I would like to introduce to you Dr. Aaron Yoder. Aaron is an associate professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, College of Public Health. He's also has an appointment with Nebraska Extension and works with the Central States Center for Agriculture Safety and Health, known as CS-CASH. Aaron grew up working on his grandparents' farm in Pennsylvania, and he is known for his research and technology solutions to increase safety across the agriculture spectrum. You can learn more about Aaron going to the Stand Up for Grain Safety website, but no further ado, please welcome Aaron Yoder.
Thanks, Barb. And thanks everybody for joining us today. It's great to have this opportunity. I wish I could all be in a room with you guys. It's more fun when we can get some audience feedback, but it's less intimidating this way, just talking to a computer. So again, appreciate you being here to talk about ladder safety today. I've got some great slides that it takes a village to pull together sometimes, but hopefully, if you have any questions along the way, type those in the chat and we'll get to those. I won't be seeing them immediately because when I'm presenting, I just see my slides. So, but feel free to type them in there and we'll try to tackle them. There may be some people on there monitoring that can answer your questions as we go. If not, we'll take care of those at the end of our time. So I think we said we had about 3 hours for this presentation. No, just kidding.
Yep, exactly.
We'll try to get through it in a reasonable amount of time and leave some time for interaction and questions and so forth. So I'm going to get started first with always like to give some grounding for why we're doing what we're doing. And as researchers, we oftentimes like to throw out statistics, but it's really easy when we throw out statistics for people to say, well, I'm in the other half of those statistics, or, I do stuff on tractor rollovers, and, half of the people that operate tractors get in a rollover and then half of those survive. And so it's easy for people to put themselves in the non-injured category. But when we tell stories and show incidents like this one, we oftentimes can make it a little more relatable. So hopefully you can relate to this a little bit. It's an on-farm injury. It's not necessarily a commercial side, but similar things could happen. And we deal with the on-farm producers as well and work with them. So this is a case from 2003 or 2003 in Iowa that one of my coworkers actually went out and did an investigation. If you're not familiar with the NIOSH FACE program, they do fatality investigations, and then they report these and put them on a website. So you can find ones if you just Google NIOSH and FACE. You can find these type of reports for different types of incidents. You can look at ones in your state. They don't do them as frequently as they used to, and they don't do them for all fatalities, but they do for some. So they're really good to see what other people have experienced out there. So this one in
Hey,
particular,
Aaron, I'm gonna just jump in really quickly.
yeah.
Your slide is very blurry, so I don't know if it's just this particular one. So if there's a
Let me
setting.
switch to the next one. Are others having that issue as well?
Yes.
Let's see.
No, I think it just may be this one. So thank you.
Okay.
We just wanted to double
Is
check.
it switching to other slides? I'm trying to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All
Yes. So
right.
it may just be this slide. So thank you. Go ahead and just give us a little more in depth about
I'm
this.
going to stop sharing for a second and reshare because when I did my share settings, I said optimize for video, and that might be causing the problem. So let me take that one off and see if it fixes it. Is that better?
Yes, small print definitely, but yes, it's clearer.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank
I
you.
don't want you to read all of that. It was just the pictures are
you.
more important than anything. So the video's better then? Okay. So anyhow, these fatality reports, they do an investigation, then you can see on the bottom here, you don't have to read that again, but the recommendations based on the investigation to improve it. So it's a really good teaching tool. And like I said, we can throw statistics at people and they aren't quite as relatable as individual events and stories like this. So this one was where there was a grain storage structure, so a grain bin that had a ladder on it. And then over the top right picture is probably the best one to look at for that. Over time, they built some other structures around it. And one of the structures that was more of a feed bin was right against or almost against the ladder, which didn't allow the operator or the person to climb up and down as easily. So they ended up falling and it was a fatality. You can see the X's on the ground in some of those other pictures that show where they fell to. So it just gives us some teaching points and some learning points about when we're designing facilities, when we're working with facilities and that sort of thing, and what we need to look out for. So I just wanted to start off with that. So a little bit of fall hazard. So this relates to slips, trips, and falls in general, and we talk about many other places. We're focusing in more on ladders today, but a little bit of information generally on on that. And Barb, are the slides still blurry?
No, they look good.
Okay, perfect. So I think it was that one setting I had on the share menu. So the walking and working surfaces, there are some different standards out there that we should be paying attention to. I'm not a regulatory expert. We have a few of those monitoring the chat. So if you have any comments or questions on the regulations, that might be a good place to put them. But looking at, when we're talking about walking and working surfaces, which would include ladders, when we talk about climbing or staircases, that sort of thing. When we look at some of the guidance that is out there in these regulatory standards, even as Barb mentioned, we may not fall in all instances underneath some of the regulatory standards, but making sure that we're aware of them, and they do provide some good guidance when we are working even outside of those standards. So they do give us those minimum guidelines. They are kind of flexible as far as what type of fall protection we use, and there's different, as we'll get to in a little bit, different types of fall protection that may work better in some instances than others. And they also give a little bit of performance criteria. So when this standard also aligns with other standards that are out there, and then there are some technology advances, whether it's the materials the fall protection's made out of, or the types of fall protection and different types of devices that are developed. So there's lots of other good information there as well. So when we look at these standards, a lot of times, like I mentioned, they are some of the best practices that we can take a look at. Some of the key points or key provisions of those are things like inspecting the walking surfaces before we use them, conducting training related to this topic. So identifying is one of the first steps to minimize hazards. So identifying and minimizing hazards. And then any extra equipment, like we mentioned, the fall protection, make sure we inspect that it's in proper condition, how we store it, and then how we actually use it. So training can be a part of all of that. We talk a lot, and I work a lot with mobile equipment or tractors and combines and that sort of thing, but the ladders on those, we can't emphasize enough using 3 points of contact, which basically means you can't have anything in your hands when you're climbing. And you want to make sure you make contact with all the rungs of a ladder or all the cases of a staircase. We see with tractors and machinery a lot people facing the wrong direction, facing away from that. So making sure that we use those 3 points of contact, face the ladder, and inspect the ladder. When we talked about fixed ladders, we know they've used cages for a long time, but those are being phased out in preference of other safety devices, making sure we use those and that, again, they're in working order. If we're working with scaffoldings, making sure that we're using those in compliance with construction industry standards. And then other types of fall protection that we can have on us, whether it's guardrails that are sort of fixed in there, or that fall protection equipment, like I mentioned, the harnesses and ropes and that sort of thing, lanyards. So as an employee, it's your responsibility, if we have employees or if we're managing employees, to make sure that they receive the training for the fall hazards in their work area. That if they see any potential hazards, something that's out of compliance or something that needs to be repaired, that we report that. And then following any other procedures we have to minimize these hazards. Housekeeping is a big one. I know I've mentioned the tractors and machinery I work with, and I saw a funny meme the other day that compared a grain farmer's tractor to a feedlot or to an animal organization's type tractor, and how one was a little bit cleaner than the other, and how one maybe had more junk on the floor in the cab than the other one. And that junk on the floor that we keep in the cabs or keep at the top or bottom of staircases, sometimes we accumulate some stuff that shouldn't be there. Those can all lead to tripping hazards. So housekeeping is important, as well as the cleanliness of the ladder. Housekeeping would be part of that. If it has mud and other debris on it, sometimes even dust or fine powders can make them slipperier. So ladder inspection and unsafe surfaces and safe use, making sure that we use that ladder and that we make sure it's in good shape, that there's no damage to it, and that everything seems to be in working order. And then finally, some training on that personal fall protection. And really need to be trained on that before you use it at all. because sometimes we can injure ourselves even more if we're using fall protection incorrectly. And as people, we know that we take a lot of steps. We climb a lot of ladders, and the more we do something, sometimes our risk perception goes lower and lower. But most of us take an average of 5,000 steps a day. If you're a fitness guru, maybe you shoot for 10 or more thousand steps a day. So when we add all of that up, even at the average of 5,000 steps a day, we're taking nearly 2 million steps a year. And each one of those steps gives us an opportunity to slip or trip or fall. In most situations, that's not the case, but if we're climbing, if we're on slippery surfaces, if we don't have the right footwear, that all raises that risk of slipping and tripping. A lot of times we think we can catch ourselves, and we know when we're at peak physical performance, maybe as a teenager, we can maybe do this, but not even then, because we're not aware of all the hazards and when they may occur. But as we age, or as we're distracted by other things, as we'll talk about later, if we're a little sleep deprived, those type of things are all going to change our reaction time. We know, and I think this one's maybe being generous to say our reaction time's 1/2 to 3/4 of a second. A lot of times it takes us that long to figure out something bad's happening. But it doesn't take very long to slip, trip, and then start to fall. And we know in the amount of time that, most likely in 1/2 a second, we can fall about 4 feet, which most likely gets us away from anything we could grab onto. We also know that there's a tremendous amount of force once we start falling. That's why when we look at fall protection and other things like that, that we need to make sure it's rated for the right force levels, because there's static force just holding a load, but then there's dynamic force of when a load's actually moving. So when we look at a person that's 200 pounds falling about 6 feet, they hit the ground with about 10,000 pounds of force. So that can be very detrimental to our health for sure. And then when we try to identify hazards, we look for the causes of that. Sometimes it's the human side, but sometimes it's our environment, right? So there's lots of different causes of these trips, and falls that we take a look at, and it can go everything from poor lighting, noise, where, we all joke about people saying, I need to turn the car radio down so I can focus on driving. There's a lot of truth to that. Too much light, sometimes glare can be an issue where we don't see things correctly or it distracts us. Having smooth surfaces, not having anti-slip materials, high temperatures, whether it's something hot we're grabbing onto or it changes the friction between our gloves or our boots and the surface that we're working with. We mentioned in that original case, narrow spaces, not giving us enough room to move. And then humidity, condensation, we know we're working in all different types of weather. So it could be wet from humidity, condensation. It could be wet from rain and other things. I actually had a grad student that worked for the railroad that did some research on the wet grip strength of gloves, which was kind of interesting because the railroad workers, when they were climbing on and off ladders on trains, were slipping more in the wet conditions because their gloves actually got really slippery when the surfaces were wet. So being aware of that and using the right gloves and other materials when we're doing that. And then we talked about the PPE of the fall protection, but sometimes PPE can get in the way if we're not fitted right or we're not using the best for that situation. I mentioned the tired and stressed part. So when we look at the human side of it, that previous slide was more environment. When we look at the human side of it, we can know it can be everything from eyesight. Fatigue is a big one, stress, and some of those behavioral health issues like anxiety and depression. Our age, we know as we get older, eyesight goes down. I'm wearing my readers right now. Climbing, our strength, grip strength, other things like that can play a huge part of that. And then if we have any health conditions, so things like diabetes or other types of heart conditions can all limit that. And the list just keeps going on. So our balance, normally our judgment is better as we have experience, but sometimes we get lackadaisical and our judgment can go down. And then if we have any other types of substances in us, sometimes medication, alcohol, drugs, those type of things. Some good guidelines for when we are working. If we see a nice icy surface like this, we need to try to stay off of that until we can get that cleared up. If there's, rain, ice, snow, mud, etc., we know that's going to make those walking and climbing surfaces a lot more hazardous. So making sure that we make a good choice when we come to situations like that we can either clean them off or find another path to where we need to get going. So avoiding those climbing and elevated surfaces when we know things are icy is one of the best things we can do. But I know sometimes jobs need to be done. Maybe we can manage it or clean those surfaces or have surfaces so we can remove that ice. We know oftentimes that metal is more slippery than some other surfaces, although growing up on some hay wagons that had some pretty polished wood on them from the hay bales sliding across them, I know that other surfaces can be that way as well. So the combination of figuring out how we get the right friction and traction on surfaces, whether it's the type of footwear we have, making sure we have the anti-slip type footwear, or that if we do have surfaces in our work site that get polished up or slippery over time, that we do something to try to rough those back up or put some sort of traction devices on them. Other parts of standards, looking at stairways, we know there's lots of different stairways, and I think we've come to the realization in a lot of places that adding those stairways like to the side of grain bins in place of ladders can improve our safety. One of the things that gets a little confusing, like I mentioned with the ladders on tractors, sometimes they almost look like a staircase and people end up facing away from the machinery. So figuring out if it was designed for you to face toward or away from. With staircases, typically we face away from them, but there are handrails we can grab onto. There are some ladders that almost look like staircases that we still need to face towards, whether we're going up or down them. Just because it isn't completely straight up and down, we might still need to face toward the machine or the apparatus that we're climbing. And playing along with that, we see a lot more of those falls and more of the injuries when people are facing away from the stairs or facing away from the ladders, especially as they're going down, because we're less likely to be holding on. And if we're climbing up something and we slip, we typically fall forward and can catch ourselves into the ladder, into the staircase. When we're going down, that fall is a lot further. Because if we fall forward, the backwards falls, we have the opportunity to hit our heads. Forwards falls, especially on going down the staircases, we fall a lot further before we catch ourselves. So making sure we use those handrails that we can see here, even in this picture, you can see some shadows, and then we're not skipping steps on the way down. And that's a huge one we see on mobile equipment and other types of equipment is people maybe jumping off those last few steps. And you get away with that a lot more when you're younger. As you get older, your knees don't take that, your ankles don't take that, and we can see other types of injuries occurring. So making sure that we have some other information as far as having guardrails, where the guardrails should be, if there's openings that have the fall risk, making sure we have those. If it's staircases, we want to prevent people from accidentally going down, like a swing gate that's in place. And a lot of times you'll see these in buildings to get people not to go to the basement if they're exiting because of a fire. If you've ever wondered what those gates were to prevent you from going to the basement, they're not locked, but what they do is keep you, as you're running down the stairs, hey, this is where I need to get out of the building. Not so much where I want to keep going to the basement and then have to go back up to the main floor to get out. And then following up with some of those other types of structural restraints. So the gates we mentioned to prevent you from going down stairways or going down ladders inadvertently. This is the same type of gate in this picture. Once you get onto a platform, sometimes there's gates you can close that prevent you from getting off the platform. It's sort of a temporary railing that you have to move to be able to get to the ladder and get to the other things. We just want to make sure that these don't cause an additional hazard by getting caught on or as we go through it. 1910-23 talks about fixed ladder safety. So looking at those in a little bit, When we look at fall protection, the cages were one that are no longer considered fall protection. It was something that was in there for a while. They need to be installed in certain situations, so check with your local regulations for that. As far as where the ladders need to be, and what type of fall protection they need to have on them. I think one of the main emphasis here was when people were falling inside of a cage, sometimes it led to additional injuries that may or may not have been greater than what the other injury would have been just from the fall. So fall arrest systems are oftentimes the preferred source because they don't have as many or have those additional hazards that the fall cages were presenting. So when we look at ladders over 25 feet above a lower level is where we need to start considering these. I would suggest considering even at other levels. But here's an example on the right of a fall protection system that has a slider that goes up and down a cable. And then the harness that's on the gentleman there, you can see, and it's kind of like a seat belt and moves along if you're moving it slowly. If there's a sudden force that pulls down on this one, it catches and grabs the cable and then gives you the opportunity to grab back onto the ladder. So the personal fall arrest systems, there are many different styles out there, but lots of different ones that can be very useful. A lot of them are related to that. Some of them are more retractable systems. Some of the more affordable and more robust ones I've seen have used this cable type system. And then a lot of the falls we see, we mentioned ladders. Those were fixed ladders. Now, when we take a look at portable ladder safety, that's in 1910-23. We know that we see a lot of general industry standards. So when we look at the numbers, again, a few statistics, but about falls from ladders account for about 20% of the general industry injuries. Typically falls from ladders are, a majority of them are less than 10 feet. So that's 6 foot, less than 6 foot categories, about a quarter of them, another almost half from 6 to 10 feet. And then it goes down as we get a little bit higher. But, we see over half in that under 10 feet, which is why, when we looked at the fall protection on fixed ladders was a lot different in higher standards. So we see a lot of those falls from higher places, where our portable ladders, it's going to be a little bit lower. We know there's many different types of ladders out there. And typically the price changes as the type changes. So when we look at both the material that they're made out of and what they're meant to be used for, typically the ladders we're going to be looking at are probably in that type 1, type 1A, and type 1AA, where they're more meant for construction and industry, a little more heavy duty. When we look at the household type ladders, which would be that type 3 ladder, their weight limits are pretty low, 200 pounds. And we can see from the chart at the bottom here how that changes over time. And those are the load limits for the ladder, whether you're carrying stuff, which isn't always the best thing to do, but sometimes we do need to carry stuff when we're, especially on portable ladders, if we're doing maintenance type work. There's lots of different types of ladders out there, but one of the types that we talk about are extension ladders. These are ones that sort of telescope on top of each other. We know that there's lots of good recommendations for how far we can telescope them, how far we should go past the top rung. We know we never stand on the top rung of ladders, but we need to make sure we have the right size ladder for the job. So picking the right tool for the job, not using our screwdriver as a hammer, right? Same thing applies to when we talk about ladders, and making sure that we use those correctly and choosing the right ladder. As I mentioned before, making sure we're facing a ladder and using 3 points of contact. A good rule of thumb as far as how high we go and how far we reach to the sides is make sure that our belt buckle never goes past the side rails or the top rung of a ladder. We don't, as I mentioned, not carrying materials on them. So if we can have a different type of system or a different type of caddy that we can, use a 5-gallon bucket like the picture on the right here to put our tools in and hoist them up to us, hang them on the ladder, but not carrying those as we're climbing and going up and down. 3 points of contact. Here's another illustration of a mobile piece of equipment, which we see people getting on and off. So the ladders or the staircases on mobile equipment. As I mentioned with tractors and machinery, we oftentimes see people face away from them if those stairs aren't too steep, or hop off of them. So making sure that we use those 3 points of contact, keep our feet clean. We know we're working in muddy, messy conditions sometimes. So making sure that we have good traction on those stairs as we get up and down. Sometimes the stairs aren't the worst part. It's the platform when we get to the top. Stairs oftentimes will have some pretty good tread on them, or metal bars on them as the tread. But when we get to that surface right at the top, sometimes there's not as much traction up there. Not a recommended practice, right? We see people straddle over the top of different types of ladders. So maybe choosing a different type of ladder where we're almost on the top rung, if not on the top rung, and then straddling over the top. And I see this quite often. And then the ladder setup, there's some good ratios. A 4-to-1 ratio is a good one. So every 4 feet of rise, we take it out a foot from the wall, basically. So if we look at the picture on the right, there are some different types of feet that help give us traction, or other types of stability devices we can use to secure the top and the bottom. Definitely the bottom we see secured a lot. Oftentimes we don't see as much the securing at the top, but there's different mechanisms out there. I've seen some great clamps lately that we can clamp the top of the ladder to the working surface we're at. So once we get up there, tying the ladder to our surface helps stabilize it as well. When we set up our extension ladders, we know we want to go beyond the top of the surface. If our ladder just barely reaches the top, that's not going to allow us to climb off of it safely. When it extends above it, we can use it as a handhold as we get off and use those side rails. And making sure we have our fall protection on if we're over our height limit when we do that. So getting tied off. Once we get one person up to the surface, if it's multiple people working, then it's easier to do some of that. So this is an example, and we actually had a case similar to this outside of Omaha not too long ago, which I'll mention when we get to the technology stuff. But this ladder doesn't go past the top surface, and that's one of the requirements. What this allows the ladder to do is slide sideways. It does appear to have some good footing on the bottom, but the way that the top is resting on, the grain bin itself is probably not the best that we could do. It can be extended more. We can see that it's an extension ladder that's almost completely overlapped on itself. And it doesn't have the 4-to-1 ratio that we would be looking for. So the bottom needs to come out a little bit more. When another type of ladder, so that was extension ladders. The next type we'll talk about quickly are those step ladders. We know that we want to make sure we extend this base and lock the spreaders on them. A lot of times we'll see people lean step ladders against the wall. And there are some cases where that may work okay, but typically a step ladder, having it extended, making sure those latches are locked, and that we don't use that top step. That top step there's for us to put stuff on, to hang tools, whatever. It's not for us to stand on. Otherwise, putting some other bad things we can do with portable ladders is put them too close to objects. We can see in this picture, the step ladder, if you were to climb it up without paying attention, you might hit your head. If you hit your head, that sometimes, even if it doesn't make us fall, it can startle us and cause us to shake or to move, which could make us unstable. Definitely want to keep an eye out for power lines. We see that happen from time to time, making sure we're not coming in contact with those. Occasionally we'll see them set up upside down, probably not with our step ladders that are expanded, but with other types of ladders, we need to make sure the feet are on the ground for that additional stability. And then we've seen some crazy pictures, I'm sure, if you're on social media, of people using ladders inappropriately. So making sure we extend the ladder and use the right size ladder for the length. We don't want to be tying ladders together. We don't want to be using other devices to get the ladder up off the ground. Don't put the ladders, and I see a lot in agriculture, ladders that are in front end loaders, so that they can pick up the ladder and get a little bit higher. There's the great picture out there of, I think it's somebody on top of a round hay bale being lifted up, and they're working on some power lines, and it said the OSHA manual just exploded. We don't want to become anything that could be used on social media as bad use of something. Oftentimes we'll see people using ladders to access other things that don't have permanent ladders, like in this case, the opening on a bin. This really is a situation where it would most likely be best to be using an extension ladder rather than the ladder that we have here, the step ladder. You can see the back legs and how they're maybe an obstruction for the extension ladder or for this type of ladder. So making sure we don't use that. Keeping those rails should be folded together. But when we use it properly, we would put it the other way, maybe to the side of it and over top of the auger or the pit on the bottom there, and make sure that that ladder would be the most stable as it could be. Right now, it's not in a good setting. And then there are some specialty ladders out there that are meant for different tasks. This is one we see a lot when maintenance and painting crews. So it's designed, again, to use the 3 different steps there, and making sure that we can make it to a safe height. I see some issues with these ladders because they're not always tall enough to get people where they need to be. But it is, when we go back to those human factors and ergonomic stuff, to carry around a ladder like this is much more reasonable than to carry around an oversized large ladder to do tasks that we don't need it for. Lots of types of old homemade ladders out there. We see these in farms quite often, but these single rail type ladders we're not to be using. They're prohibited in the standards. I mentioned mobile equipment a little bit, but just as we're talking about doing maintenance or talking about moving parts, some of our systems are electric, some are hydraulic. When we are working with hydraulics, something to keep an eye on, and this goes back to the housekeeping, was, if we spill oil or lubricants in places, they're also going to make that ladder slippery. So I just wanted to point that fact out real quickly. Ladder storage, again, we want to keep these in the best shape possible, inspect them on a regular basis, but keeping them, some ideas there are good, well-ventilated areas, heat and sun, especially our fiberglass ladders and plastics that are on ladders. The sunlight and heat are going to deteriorate those. Not as much with the aluminum type materials or other types of steel materials, but definitely when we talk about plastics and fiberglass, the sunlight can do damage on those. Extension ladders, we can see this is a great example of that in our flat ladders, looking at the rack that they're on, making sure that we have the appropriate storage. Sometimes leaning them up against the walls can create additional hazards. So having hooks to put them on is probably the best way to store them. If we do see defects, whether that could be bends or snags or chips out of things, here in the case of the fiberglass ladder on the right, you can see the split rail. And even on the left, where we have a bend in one of the cross braces, that's enough to start weakening the structure. So we should try to identify those and replace those, either repair if it's repairable. Zip ties are not a repair on ladders, or duct tape. So making sure they're either repaired correctly or taken out of service and disposed of. Again, fiberglass ladders, we see they're nice because they're lighter weight and easier to transport around. They don't conduct electricity and a lot of things like that, but they also are a little more susceptible to splitting and cracking, to deterioration from weather and those type of things. So there's a trade-off for that lightweight and ease of use. So then finally, I just had we talked a lot about slip, trip, and fall prevention. So we have some technology we can use for that, especially when we talk about ladder safety. A lot of this technology is alerting us to after a fall has occurred, and we always try to go to the prevention side more than the detection side. So there are some, if you like to use your phones or other things or that sort, there's some great smartphone apps there when it comes to setting up ladders. There's, I think, Smart Ladders called one of them. I know there's the NIOSH ladder tool or the OSHA/NIOSH ladder tool, which helps you get your ladder set up to the right angle. So you can, if you can see in the little picture at the top there, it's a green arrow right now, but you lean that against your ladder. And if your ladder's at the right angle, it actually measures the angle your ladder's at. Something else with the smartphones and smartwatches is they do have fall detection. I mentioned that ladder leaning up against the grain bin, which led to a fall. We had an older gentleman in outside of Omaha a few years back, and it actually made it on the news where his son had just bought him, older farmer, I mean in the 80s or 90s, year old, and his son just bought him a smartwatch to wear around to help track him a little bit. And he was climbing on a grain bin, cleaning out the vents with a ladder, extension ladder that was leaning against the side. He ended up falling. And as you can see in the top right corner, when your watch detects that you fall, it will automatically call 911 if you don't tell it you're okay. So he fell, didn't tell it was okay. It called 911. They came out and rescued him, and they said maybe he might not have survived if he didn't have that system on. So that's just one. I was talking to a farmer's wife the other day that wanted to be able to, I wouldn't say monitor and track him, but know if he was in trouble, we'll say. And for individuals and for smaller operations, sometimes these smartwatch type systems are way more economical than a larger system that was designed for an industry. The ones that are designed for industry, there's two devices that I've been using in some research and other things. One that measures our biometrics a little bit, so our heart rates, skin temperature, stuff like that we can tell when things are going bad or right before they go bad. And it also has some environmental monitoring in it and that sort of thing. But all of these devices also detect if one of your workers fall or if you fall, and alerts the management system. And however you have the system set up, it can either text message people, call people, that sort of thing, and say there was an incident. And most of them can also broadcast the location of the incident. And then the bottom one there, the Make You Safe device that I've used, only measures the environment. It doesn't measure any of the stuff about the person, but it can detect slips, trips, and falls, repetitive motions, maybe too much excessive force use and that sort of thing. Anything over 2 Gs, it takes a snapshot of what the environment is at that time. And it monitors a few other things like light levels, noise levels, that type of stuff, which gives safety managers a little bit of insight as far as what their workers are being exposed to. It doesn't really tell you whether they're wearing their PPE or how they're being protected from those hazards, but it does let you know locations on your operation that you might want to do a little more investigating in. Or if you see slip, trips, fall warnings, you can follow up on those events if they weren't reportable events or they weren't events, and maybe help minimize future slip, trips, and falls. So kind of excited about using some of the technology to help us collect more information on near misses, because the more near miss information we can get, the more we can do to help prevent future injuries. So. And I'm going to leave you with one last video. I mentioned being on social media, so we'll see how this works with my current sharing settings.
Walk it off.
Everybody had a dad like that, right? So it's amazing to me how many incidents I see on social media of people either making fun of an incident like that or real incidents with people slipped, tripping, and fall in agriculture, climbing on and off machinery, climbing up and down ladders. If you look out there and once you watch a couple of them, it keeps showing you more of them. But there's lots of opportunities out there to use as educational tools, as I mentioned at the beginning, having those stories, having those even clips like this gets people talking and thinking about that. So the next time they climb in and out of their tractor, maybe it'll stick in their mind about the process they should be using versus the one they saw on social media. So with that, that's all the slides I have for now. So we'll open it up to questions. There's my contact information. You can reach out to our sponsors or reach out directly to me if you have any questions. And I guess I will leave that up for a second and then stop sharing my slides and see if we have any questions to take care of or comments. Thank you for listening so well. I assume you're still listening.
Yes, if you could go ahead and unshare. There we go. All right. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. A lot of great comments, especially about just being straight and to the point. Excellent examples and excellent information for people to remember, remembering that it starts at home. This isn't just things that we should be using, just at work. That we all need to take this home and do this. You talked about defects and taking things out of service. And I remember a coworker that did that same thing. Hey, sometimes we're cheap. You don't want to buy a new ladder, and had half of an extension ladder that was still good. So was using that. Well, it was the end that didn't have the feet on it, and he was only 3 steps up, and it slid, and he broke his back. So the smallest things can be very fatal to us. So I'm going to get to some questions here. Again, thank you for sharing your knowledge and just really down to earth information for us. So are there any solutions that can decrease the feelings of dizziness, such as you have inner ear infection or something like that? You kind of talked about technology.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could try. I'll preface this with saying I'm not a medical professional, and I would probably say that's a person you need to talk to. There are the motion sickness type medications out there, the patches that people wear on cruise ships and other things like that. So there are some over-the-counter solutions, I would say. I've even seen some bands that you can wear on your wrist that work with a specific pressure point to help with stability a little bit like that. But my recommendation is, if you're dealing with stability issues like that, to stay off of the ladders. If you have I know different sicknesses and cold sometimes can make us disoriented and can do that. But if you're experiencing those type of conditions all the time, to talk to your healthcare provider about that, to alert your employer and let them know that that's going on. I know a lot of times, and I think we're shifting away from this, but safety used to just be the big stick that said, no, don't do this. And you didn't want to share anything with them. But we're finding out more, the more we talk to our coworkers and the more we talk to our supervisors and let them aware of that. If nothing else, I think the COVID epidemic or pandemic has changed our philosophy a little bit on interacting with other people, and hopefully we care about other people a little bit more. So having those open dialogues with people, don't hide anything like that if you have that type of situation.
And that goes right back to, your little video there at the end. We're past the point, whether it's in our life, our work, of, dust it off, walk it off.
Right.
It is more about, hey, understanding. I myself have an eye disease, and I lack depth perception. So for me, knowing, first of all, I do have to wear contacts when out in a situation where I have to have safety goggles, because to wear glasses with then safety goggles over the top makes it even worse. So always knowing, what are your health risks? Again, your health, your vision, all of those affect your ability. If my bin ladders do not have cages and I don't have a ladder safety device, what should I invest in?
Yeah, and I'll also say that I'm not endorsing any of the product that I talk about, but the best solution that I've seen comes from a company out of Canada called Northern Strand, I think it is, and they make cables. That's their main thing. But they sell a fall arrest system in a bucket that
Okay.
has everything you need to install on your grain bins. And then what you do is you install these cables beside each one of your ladders, but then all the rest of the gear can be changed from one grain bin to the other. So the only permanent fixture you put on the grain bin are these cables, but then the fall protection goes with you from bin to bin. So it has the harness, it has the fall arrest device, and it comes with a certain amount of cable, and you can buy additional cable. So those are the best systems that I've seen out there. And others from the industry, feel free to share in the chat or other things that you've been working with on that. But Northern Strand, which is a Canadian cable company, they make the different wire strand cables, has had the most cost-effective system that I've seen.
Okay, thank you. I did forget, sorry, everybody. We do have some poll questions. And so while we were going on to a few more Q&A, we're gonna pop up a poll. And that way you can, I guess, show us if you were paying attention today. So next question, again, as Catherine puts up that poll for everybody. Let's see. Do you know anything about smart ladders being developed?
I've heard of them. I don't personally know about them. I'm going to have to do a little more research in that area. But so feel free to share any information you have again in the chat on those type of devices. Like I said, I've been using the smartphones and other things like that to try to make sure we're doing things right. Most of these devices, they're helping us do what we should be doing easier. Some
Right.
people get excited about technology like I do. Sometimes when we find technology, we can use that to motivate us to be safer and healthier. So I'm all for the technology stuff. So feel free to share any of that information. But I don't know anything specifically about smart ladders yet.
Okay, and I do see there were a few that were popped up in the chat. So thank you, people, for being so quick and helping give other resources to other people. Hey, talk a little bit more about, again, the lack of sleep or health issues. How does that affect issues with slips, trips, and falls?
Yeah, so some of the best stuff, comes out of the safe driving world when it talks about sleep deprivation and other things like that. And I've seen a lot of different studies and research that shows, being sleep deprived can be similar to being drunk or to be intoxicated. So the same things that go along with those substances where we don't make as good of decisions, our reaction time slows down. We talked about reaction time. All those things come into play, and then vibration can be another one of those things that plays along with that. So a big part of that is just our physical ability. So our strength goes down, our reaction time goes down, our decision making skills go down. We know that sleep that happens. Everybody requires a different amount of sleep. We know younger people, my teenagers, I feel like they sleep all the time. We know oftentimes older people don't sleep as much, but that guideline of 8 hours of sleep a night, some people think it might be a little crazy, but we see the best results, people make the better decisions, and there's lots of different studies out there that look both in agriculture and in other places. Like I said, the driving world and the driving research is probably the best place to look for that. But it really does impair most of our abilities when we are sleep deprived.
Yeah, yeah, very definitely. Very interesting. Again, everybody to remember, sleep deprivation relatable to, again, under the influence of alcohol. That should really change a concept in our minds. At what point, when observing rust on a ladder that has not rusted through, do you tag out a ladder?
That's a great question. We probably our biggest goal would be no rust at all. So if you do see some rust, try to clean it off. And in the process of cleaning it off, you should be able to see, definitely if there's any holes through it, but it should still be fairly, it depends on where it's at, but any amount of rust, I would say is probably too much. But so if we see a little bit of surface rust and we can clean it off and it comes off, if there's any about a metal or that deteriorated or metal that's missing, then I would say it needs to come out of service.
Okay, thank you. People have been just phenomenal about posting some good resources here for everybody in the group. Again, just you don't, it's not about endorsing or promoting brands, but making sure everybody has resources to check out. We all know you Google one link and you're going to get a whole nother list of them under. So, make sure to look what's best for you. There was some good information earlier about, not that 5-gallon buckets aren't okay, but they don't use 5-gallon buckets, but there are canvas bags that had closures on top. So again, a lot of great tools out there to make sure that we are keeping 3-point contact with that ladder, and that we're not just trying to, lump things up in our arm, past the date. Even at home, I'm carrying my paint can, my paintbrush, I'm carrying my paint pan and trying to hop my way up the ladder. So again, a lot of great things out there for us to be safe. I don't think, somebody said, hey, make sure to check the rivets and other connections. Has everybody taken the quiz that was popped out there? Make sure to go ahead and take it. I think we have a lot of great comments and people's, again, personal reflections on, hey, falling off ladders and things that they have done. If I've missed a question, we are going to go ahead and open up here shortly so everybody can ask questions directly. If I missed it in the chat, man, you guys out there, we've had such a great active chat today. So again, if I missed something, I apologize to you. Just a reminder, as we see out there, Catherine has posted for us certificates that you can download for the day. So as you're in your chat, when you see those certificates, just hover over the top of them and you will see a little down arrow. When you click that down arrow, you can download it to your desktop. Catherine, if you want to go ahead and unmute everybody as the host, you can unmute and bring them on camera. That way, if anybody, again, wants to ask a question directly, they can. There will be a survey after you exit out. Please take that survey. We definitely want to be sure that we know what you guys want for topics for next year. And again, a reminder to everybody, hop on tomorrow. We've got a great session tomorrow. We've got great session this afternoon. If you or you have employees that are in need of a Spanish language session. So I'm going to stop talking. Anybody out here?
Yeah, it looks like Nicholas has a question.
Yeah, great, Nicholas. I see your hand up. Go ahead.
How you doing?
Good.
The question is, I'm working in construction and some of the subcontractors are using the ladder without safety decals, and sometimes they're, not legible. It's just, I tell them to not use it, but they said, well, it's not a regulations that it says you cannot using it. So, any recommendations?
How about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you're doing your part by at least speaking up and saying about it. Maybe our regulatory people online can help us out with that a little bit too, is whether there are regulations for that. Because sometimes they're out there and people aren't aware of them. But unless you're in charge of the people, The other thing you could do is report that to somebody that's above. Like I think someone just put in the chat, OSHA. You don't always want to go and you report people, but if you see it and you think it's a serious offense, you really should be doing that. But maybe if you're a subcontractor, reporting it to the person that's you're subbing for and letting them know what you're seeing, that sort of thing. I would start at that level, and if nothing seems to be done and it's a repeat offense and you think it's a serious offense, maybe to somebody at OSHA about it. And if you don't want to just report them directly, you could start with a basic conversation and ask them for advice of how you would handle that situation. Would be the way that I would approach that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Who was that? Sound like David, didn't it?
Yeah, we do
Crystal,
say,
your
hey,
microphone's open. Did you have a question?
Oh, my apologies. I did not.
That's okay.
Did have a great comment from Scott out there that they had an account that just, had an OSHA citation for lack of safety stickers. So, thank you, Nicholas, for, bringing that to attention. Obviously, it's out there and we're looking at it. Brian, we need to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Labels do fall under their recommendations. Replacement labels can be ordered from the manufacturer. So thank you, Brian, for popping in and helping us with that. Aaron, and I know since you're not sharing, you might be able to see, but what are your thoughts on those extended ladders that turn into a platform type of
Yes,
thing?
I know, like the gorilla ladders and other things like that out there. I've never personally used one. I know they make proper platforms that go between ladders, and I would suggest using those. I'm guessing the ones that are flexible like that are more meant for homeowner type situations. So I would have to do a little more research and look at what the weight ratings on them and the load ratings and other things like that. But I've seen better setups, and I would recommend, I know it might cost a little more, but the platforms that they make that actually attach between ladders. So I think it goes back to using the right tool for the right purpose. You can use a crescent wrench as a ladder or as a hammer. You can use a crescent wrench as many different things, but that doesn't mean maybe you should be using it for that. And even though those were designed to be platforms like that, I would take a serious look at the load ratings that are on them and then the type of use that they're intended for. A construction company or somebody that would be using it all the time would be different than, say, somebody that's painting the ceiling in their house. So I would look at the intended use and try to find the best tool for the job that you're doing.
With all the great information that you gave to Aaron, I think it spurs a lot of us to, go look in our garage and our storerooms at home. I think plenty of times, for many years, I had one of those little step ladders that was a little wooden ladder, 2 steps and a platform. And hey, I could reach the top of anything for it. Thank God I'm tall. I didn't have to use it most. But now it's a plant stand. So, make sure you assess all those ladders. I like that, the right tool for the job. Because there are weight ratings, there are use ratings. Hey, making sure that you are paying attention, watching near power lines. You shouldn't have a metal extension ladder when you're in those situations. So again, everything that we've talked about this week is definitely about assessing those hazards before you start the job. Assess what you have available to you as tools. So thank you for that, those continued reminders, Aaron. Just these simple things that we can do.
See, there's a question out there about the Northern Strand system that has a shock lanyard and whether that complies. So I'll defer that to some of my regulatory experts out there.
Yeah, not something I'm totally familiar with. Although, again, as we're going up ladders, you do need to now have that lanyard. Let's see. I don't know. Yes, Catherine, definitely watching using tools near those power lines. Every tool extends our reach and extends our hazard then thereof. Yeah, I don't know, again, Adam, something that we'll keep looking for to see if those ladders with the shock pack meet that standard, something we'll have to look for. Brian, he believes the ladder protection lanyards need to be connected to the front D-ring and be limited to 9 inches. Thank you for that. That's with any fall protection. Every now and then you see somebody puts on in a sense, a longer lanyard on it because they want to be able to reach farther. Hey, you're up on top of a rail car and man, we can only extend out to 2 cars. I want to get out to 3 cars. And now what you've done is if you fall off that car, you've put yourself in a bigger hazard, broken bones, dislocations, because you're not able to snap back. You may hit the ground before you're able to pull yourself back. So excellent information, great things to be aware of. I'll give it here about 2 more minutes for everybody. If anybody has any other questions, hey, Joe has said a lot of times when transitioning from a fixed ladder to a platform and then to another ladder on a bin or such, there's a certain distance that is not protected. Need to install fallback straps from the ladder cage to handrail below to help not falling to the ground. Very definitely.
Great
Thanks for
point.
that
Those
insight.
transitions off and on ladders, whether it's at a platform or at the top of the ladder, can be an area that we need to be especially cautious. So great point.
Yeah. Again, I know myself with my vision issues, upstairs, up ladders, all those things are very simple. It's down because I don't know where the next step is. I don't know off the side of that rail car as I'm coming. It's finding those things. So again, always make sure to assess yourself and know your situation. If you have the ability to put some high vis markings on things, on stairs, contrasts on steps that are all the same color going down. Sometimes you can't see that edge of the step. I think I've almost injured myself many more times by stepping down a step that wasn't actually there anymore. How many knees you jerk. So
Power step, we call it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Right, I don't see any more questions going in. As Catherine mentioned, make sure to flip through any of the resources that you wanted to download or certificates. Make sure to pop those out here in the next 2 minutes. Lisa said you can call your area OSHA and ask questions and stay anonymous. Better to be proactive and call instead of calling to report. And that's something that's really maybe what we're hoping out of this week too. That doesn't matter. Aaron's from a university. We have OSHA representatives. We have industry representatives, and it's all about working together. We're all in it for the same thing. Sometimes we think of, and somebody may say, what the heck, why are you saying this? But sometimes we think of OSHA as, man, that big dog, big bad police person that's out there just to hammer us. No, they're out here for the same reason we're all doing this, is to keep people safe. So partnering. So thank you very much, Lisa, for that comment, because yes, if you develop that relationship that you can ask those questions, you are just keeping your people safer. Yep, Catherine, missing that last step is always a big problem. Brian, OSHA figure D9 in the old standard shows the backfall protection. Google it and you'll find the platform. So thank you. Thank you for all the information. 1 more minute and we are going to end today. Thank you again, Aaron. It's a pleasure working with you all the time. Thank you, just for always being available and being out there, whether it's for producers or industry. You're a great resource. Thank you very much, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. I enjoy it, and everyone feel free to reach out at any time.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And if you haven't registered for tomorrow's session, be sure to go to standupforgrainsafety.org. The link that you used this morning it's good for this afternoon also. So anybody that would like to jump onto the Spanish session or bring your employees or coworkers, go ahead and have them jump on. So great information. And again, in a way people need to learn. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Bye, Erin. Thank you.
You're welcome.